My stepdaughter changed the locks on my house while I was 3 states away burying my little sister. I came home from the funeral, exhausted, hollowed out, still wearing the black dress I'd bought for the service, and my key didn't turn. Taped to my own front door was a note telling me I had 48 hours to vacate the premises. She signed it with a single letter, like we were strangers. She had no idea that I was the one who paid off that mortgage in cash 4 years earlier. And she definitely had no idea that the original deed, with her father's signature transferring the house into my name alone, was sitting in a safety deposit box 2 miles from where she stood gloating. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Let's go back to the beginning. My name is Denise. I'm 58 years old. And for 11 years I was married to a man named Roland, the kind of man people describe as solid, not flashy, not loud, just dependable, in a way that made you feel like the ground under you would hold. We met when I was 47, freshly divorced, raising my son Marcus on my own, after his father decided fatherhood was optional. Roland came into my life slow and steady, the way good things sometimes do when you've stopped expecting them. Roland had a daughter from his first marriage, Alicia. She was 23 when we met, 34 by the time everything I'm about to tell you happened. Her mother had died of an aneurysm when Alicia was 19, sudden and merciless, the kind of death that leaves no time to say goodbye and plenty of time to be angry about it. I understood that anger. I tried, for 11 years, to be patient with it. I told myself, grief makes people territorial, that Alicia wasn't rejecting me, she was protecting the last version of her family that still made sense to her. So when she refused to call me anything but Dad's wife, even at holidays, even after a decade, I let it go. I told myself, patience was its own kind of love. If you've ever tried to love someone who refused to let you in, you already know how exhausting that patience can become. Tell me in the comments if you've been there. Roland and I built a good life in that house. His house originally, the one he'd bought with his first wife, 20 years before I ever walked through the door. I never asked him to change that. I never asked for my name on anything. I brought my own furniture, cooked in that kitchen for over a decade, planted a garden in the backyard that Roland swore I'd kill, and that somehow thrived anyway. I built a life inside walls that legally belonged to someone else, and I did it without complaint, because that's what you do when you love someone and you trust the family you married into. The trust started cracking the year Roland got sick. It began as fatigue he blamed on age, then chest pains he blamed on stress. By the time we got the diagnosis, congestive heart failure, advanced, the kind of prognosis doctors deliver while looking at their shoes instead of your face, Roland had already been quietly declining for the better part of a year, hiding it from all of us, including his own daughter. I became his full-time caretaker overnight. I learned to read EKG printouts. I learned which hospital vending machine had the good coffee. Because I spent so many nights in that waiting room, I became a regular. I learned to give him his injections at home, so he wouldn't have to keep driving to the clinic. I quit taking on new clients at the accounting firm where I'd worked for 15 years, because Roland needed someone with him every single day, and there was no one else. Alicia visited on weekends when it suited her schedule. I understood. She had her own life, her own job, a fiancé, an apartment 2 hours away. But understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't leave a mark. The insurance covered maybe 60% of what Roland needed. The rest came out of savings that emptied faster than either of us wanted to admit. 6 months into his illness, I did something I never told Alicia, something I barely told anyone. I sold my condo, the one thing that had ever been entirely, unquestionably mine, the property I'd bought with my own money after my first divorce, the place that represented every ounce of independence I'd clawed back for myself in my 40s. I sold it, and I put $61,000 of the proceeds directly into keeping Roland alive and keeping our house, his house, out of foreclosure, because somewhere in that second year of his illness, I discovered he'd quietly fallen behind on the mortgage, trying to cover his own medical bills, without telling me either. Roland cried when I told him what I'd done. Actual tears, the first I'd seen from him since his own father's funeral. He begged me to take the money back, to buy myself something, anything, to keep some piece of it for myself. I told him no. I told him that's what you do for someone you love, and I meant every word. But Roland, being a man who kept meticulous records his entire life, wasn't willing to just accept the sacrifice and move on. About 4 months before he died, on one of his better days, he asked me to drive him to see an attorney. Not his usual estate lawyer, a different one, recommended by his older sister Carolyn, a woman known in the family for being sharp, private, and not particularly sentimental about anything. In that office, Roland told the attorney he wanted to refinance the house in a way that formally recognized my contribution and then transfer the deed into my name outright, effective immediately, not as part of any will, not something that would go through probate after his death, but a real, notarized transfer while he was alive and of clear mind to make the decision. "If something happens to me," he said, gripping my hand so tight it left marks, "I want you protected. I don't want anyone deciding what you deserve after I'm gone. I'm deciding now, while I still can." We signed the paperwork on a Tuesday in March. Notarized, witnessed, filed with the county within the week. The house, entirely, unambiguously, became mine. Roland meant to tell Alicia. He told me a dozen times that he would, that he just needed to find the right moment, that he didn't want her to think it meant he loved her any less. And then his heart, the one that had been failing quietly for 2 years, simply stopped one Tuesday morning while I was making his coffee in the kitchen he'd once shared with someone else. He never found the right moment. He ran out of time before he ran out of good intentions, and I was left holding both a legal document and a secret I didn't know how to hand to a grieving 34-year-old woman who had already lost one parent and now had to bury the second. I didn't tell her, not out of malice, out of mercy, or what I thought was mercy at the time. I told myself there would be a better moment. I was wrong about that, and it cost me more than I expected. If you're someone who's ever kept a hard truth quiet to protect someone else's grief and had it backfire on you later, I want to hear about it in the comments. This part of the story is where everything starts to unravel. The 8 months after Roland's death were the hardest of my life, and I genuinely believed nothing could top them, until my sister Pam called me from Ohio to tell me her cancer, the one she'd been quietly fighting in remission for 3 years, had come roaring back with a vengeance the doctors hadn't anticipated. She was gone within 4 months, fast, brutal, the kind of loss that doesn't give your body time to finish grieving the last one before it demands you grieve again. I flew out for the funeral in October, red-eyed and running on fumes, leaving the house, my house, though almost no one but Roland's lawyer and I knew that, locked up behind me. I asked Alicia, who I'd been slowly, carefully trying to rebuild some kind of relationship with since her father's death, to keep an eye on the place while I was gone, water the plants, grab the mail, small, ordinary trust between 2 women who were technically family, even if the word had never quite fit right between us. I landed back home 4 days later, exhausted in a way that goes past your bones and settles somewhere deeper. I pulled into my own driveway, dragged my suitcase up the porch steps, and put my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again, and again. I stood there in the cold October evening, jiggling a key that no longer belonged to a lock that used to be mine, and for a long moment I genuinely thought I'd lost my mind from grief, that maybe I'd wandered onto the wrong porch entirely. Then I saw the note taped just below the peephole, written in handwriting I recognized instantly, because I'd been looking at it on birthday cards for 11 years. "This is Dad's house. It should have gone to family, not to someone who was only ever married in. You have 48 hours to arrange to collect your things. After that, I'll consider anything left behind abandoned. Don't make this ugly. A." I stood there in the porch light with my suitcase, in the same black dress I'd worn to bury my sister 4 days earlier, and I did not cry. I did not pound on the door. I did not call Alicia screaming, which I promise you, some tired, furious part of me desperately wanted to do. Instead, I turned around, walked back to my rental car, drove to the nearest hotel, and sat on the edge of a stiff, unfamiliar bed and made exactly one phone call. Not to Alicia, to Roland's attorney. The one who'd notarized the deed transfer 4 years before Roland died. His voice on the other end was calm, in the way lawyers get when they've seen this exact situation play out 100 times before. "Denise," he said, "that house has been legally yours since the transfer was filed. She has no legal authority to lock you out. What she's done is illegal. It's an unlawful eviction, and depending on your state, it could be criminal." "I know," I said, staring at a water stain on the hotel ceiling. "But I don't want to come at her with a police report and a battering ram. Not yet. I want her to understand exactly what she did before I take it that far." He was quiet for a second. Then he said something I've thought about every day since. "Grief makes people cruel sometimes, Denise. That doesn't mean you have to let them get away with it. You can be gentle and still be firm. Those aren't opposites." That sentence became the whole blueprint for what I did next. If you've ever had to decide between fighting fire with fire or fighting fire with proof, drop a comment telling me which one you'd have chosen, because I chose proof, and it changed absolutely everything. For the next 6 days, I stayed in that hotel room, and I did not call Alicia once. I let her believe her plan had worked exactly as intended, that I'd slink away quietly, embarrassed, defeated, unwilling to fight a grieving young woman over a house. I let the silence stretch on purpose, because silence, I was learning, could be its own kind of weapon when you used it right. What I actually did during those 6 days was build a file. Not out of anger, out of precision, the same precision Roland had taught me to respect during 15 years of working in accounting. I pulled the bank statement showing the $61,000 that left my condo sale and landed directly in our joint mortgage account. I pulled the refinance documents with both our signatures. I pulled the notarized deed transfer itself, dated a full 2 years before Roland's death, which mattered enormously, because it proved this wasn't some deathbed maneuver dreamed up in his final delirious days. It was a clear-headed decision made by a man who knew exactly what he wanted and had the legal capacity to make it happen. I gathered receipts for the roof I'd financed, the furnace I'd replaced, 11 years of a marriage measured out in invoices and repair records that told a story no note taped to a door could erase. And then I did something Alicia never saw coming. I called her Aunt Carolyn. Carolyn, Roland's older sister, had never much cared for Alicia's temper, and had been the one, years earlier, to recommend the very attorney who drafted the deed transfer in the first place. She'd always liked me, in the quiet, undemonstrative way some people show affection, and when I told her what Alicia had done, that she'd locked me out of my own house while I was burying my sister, there was a long silence on the line before Carolyn finally said, in a voice colder than I'd ever heard from her, "That girl has always confused volume for power. Send me everything you have." I did. 6 days after I'd stood shivering on my own porch, reading an eviction note from a woman I'd spent 11 years trying to love, I drove back to that house. I didn't call ahead. I brought a locksmith. I brought a folder thick enough to stop a door. And, on the advice of the attorney, I brought a sheriff's deputy along for a civil standby, not to arrest anyone, not to escalate anything, simply to stand as a neutral witness so that nothing that happened next could later be twisted into a different story than the truth. Alicia opened the door in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, morning light behind her, and her face did something complicated and fast when she saw the deputy standing just behind my shoulder. "You can't be here," she said, voice already climbing. "I told you, you told me a lot of things," I said, and I held up the folder, not raising my voice at all, because I'd promised myself in that hotel room, that I would not give her the satisfaction of watching me lose control the way she had. This is the deed. Filed 6 years, 4 years before your father passed, notarized, witnessed by the same attorney your Aunt Carolyn has trusted for 20 years. This house has been legally mine this entire time, Alicia. You didn't inherit it, because it was never your father's to leave you. He gave it to me, in writing, with a clear mind, while he was very much alive to explain his reasons if you'd ever asked him. Her coffee mug slipped out of her hand and shattered against the porch boards Roland and I had repainted together the summer before his diagnosis, coffee splashing dark across the pale wood, like a bruise spreading. Dad would never do that without telling me, she said, and for the first time in 11 years, I heard something under her anger that sounded almost like a child's voice. He meant to tell you, I said, and this part was true, and I said it as gently as I could manage. He told me a dozen times he would. He just got sick faster than either of us expected, and then he ran out of time. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you taped an eviction notice to my own front door while I was burying my sister, and I need you to understand exactly what you did before this goes any further. She didn't say anything else. The locksmith rekeyed the door in 11 quiet minutes, while the three of us stood on that porch in a silence so thick you could have cut it with the same knife Alicia had used to tape up that note 4 days earlier. Word travels fast through a small family, especially one that had been quietly fracturing along the same lines for 11 years. By that evening, Carolyn had already called Alicia's mother's side of the family, the aunts and cousins who'd always privately disapproved of how coldly Alicia treated me, who'd bitten their tongues at holiday dinners for over a decade, rather than cause a scene. By the next morning, Alicia's fiancé Trevor, a quiet, careful man who had sat through 11 Thanksgivings watching his future wife freeze me out at every single one of them, sent me a text message I still have saved on my phone to this day. He said he was sorry for what she'd done, that he'd warned her this would blow up in her face, and that he hoped I was doing okay. Alicia called me 4 times over the next week. I let 3 of those calls go straight to voicemail, not out of spite, but because I genuinely needed the space to figure out how I felt before I let her hear my voice again. The 4th time, I finally answered. "You humiliated me," she said, her voice cracking on the word humiliated. In front of a police officer, in front of the whole family. "No," I said quietly. "You humiliated yourself the moment you decided to lock a grieving woman out of her own home. I just stopped letting you humiliate me on top of that." Neither of us said anything for a long moment. I could hear her breathing on the other end, ragged, like she was trying not to cry, and losing that particular fight. "I don't know how to not be angry at you," she finally admitted. And this, I think, was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 11 years. "You got to keep him. At the very end, when it mattered most, you got to be the one holding his hand, and I was 2 hours away because you never called me soon enough, and I didn't get that. I've hated you a little for that, every single day since he died, and I didn't even fully understand why, until right now, saying it out loud to you. And there it was. The truth, sitting underneath every cold Thanksgiving, every clipped phone call, every refusal to use my name. It was never really about the house. It was never really about the money. It was about a daughter who could not forgive me for being the one who was there when her father took his last breath, when she wasn't. "I didn't take him from you, Alicia," I said, and I felt my own eyes finally sting after 4 days of holding it together. "Cancer took your mother. His heart took him. I just didn't leave when things got hard. That's the only thing I did differently than anyone else in your life ever has." She didn't have a response to that. We sat there together on opposite ends of a phone line that had been fraying quietly for over a decade, both of us finally, exhaustingly, saying the real thing out loud instead of the angry thing. "Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments below, and let me know if you've ever had a moment like that one, where the real wound underneath a family fight finally surfaces after years of silence. We are not close, Alicia and I, not the way I once hoped we might be. Some wounds don't heal just because the truth finally gets said out loud. Sometimes the truth is only the beginning of a longer, quieter kind of grief that both people have to walk through separately before they can walk through it together, if they ever do at all. But she came to Thanksgiving this year. She sat 2 seats down from me at a table Roland used to sit at the head of. She didn't call me Dad's wife once. She called me Denise, actually said my name out loud, for what I think might have been the very first time in 11 years, and something in my chest loosened just a little when she did. The house is still mine, of course, legally and completely, the way Roland wanted it to be. I replanted his garden this spring, the tomatoes he always swore I'd kill, and somehow, 6 years running now, I never have. Some mornings I sit out on that porch with a cup of coffee, in the same spot where a coffee mug once shattered across the boards, and I think about how close I came to losing the last place in this world that still felt like his hands were somewhere in it, all over a lock that was never hers to change, and a truth I waited too long to tell. If someone in your own life has ever tried to take something that was rightfully yours, assuming you'd be too tired, too grieving, or too polite to fight back, I want to hear that story in the comments below. You are not alone in this, and setting a boundary, even a quiet one, even one delivered through a lawyer instead of a shouting match, is not cruelty. It's survival. And if this story meant something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear that grief does not have to mean giving up what's rightfully yours. We've got a lot more stories like this one coming, and I would love for you to be here for the next one.